I was holding a casserole dish with both hands when my son called to tell me not to come to his housewarming. The dish was still warm. I remember that more than I remember his exact words, because the warmth went right through the oven mitts and into my palms, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should set it down before I dropped it. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I set the casserole on the counter, and I said, "All right, Daniel." And that was it. That was the whole conversation. I didn't cry. I just stood there. My name is Grace. I'm 68 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood exactly where I stood with my son. I raised him mostly alone after his father died, 22 years of packed lunches and parent-teacher conferences, and a mortgage I carried by myself on a school secretary's salary, which is another way of saying I know how to stretch a dollar until it screams. I know how paperwork works. I know how patience works. What I didn't know, until that phone call, was how little either of those things seemed to matter to my own son. But I want to back up, because this story doesn't start with a phone call. It starts 2 years earlier, with a house.
Tuesday came gray and steady, the way it always does in early spring here, and that was the day Daniel first brought up the subject of buying a place of his own. He and Ashley had been renting a 2-bedroom that smelled permanently like the downstairs neighbor's cigarettes, and Daniel sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table his father used to sit at, and told me they'd found a house, a real one, 4 bedrooms, a yard, good schools 2 streets over. All they needed, he said, was help with the down payment, just help getting started. He'd pay me back, he said, every dollar. I want to be honest with you about something right now, because it matters for everything that comes after. I didn't hesitate. Not because I'm a pushover. I raised that boy alone. I am not a pushover. But because I loved him, and because for 38 years I sold houses before I ever kept a house of my own in that neighborhood. And I know exactly what it means to a young family to finally have a door they can paint whatever color they want. So I said yes. But I didn't just hand him a check and wish him luck. I structured it the way I structured every closing I ever worked.
I took out a home equity line against my own house, the house Robert and I bought in 1987, the house that was fully paid off by the time he passed, and I used that money as the down payment. And because I have never once in my life signed something without reading every line of it twice, the deed on Daniel and Ashley's new house had my name on it, co-owner. Not a gift, an investment, protected the way any investment should be protected. Daniel didn't love that detail at the time. Ashley loved it even less. But I told them both, plainly, the way I tell every young couple who sits across from me nervous about a mortgage. This isn't about control. This is about protection. For all of us. And Daniel, to his credit, said he understood. He hugged me. He said, "You're the only one who's ever had my back, Mom." That was 2 years ago. That's the sentence I kept replaying while I stood in my kitchen holding a casserole dish nobody wanted. 2 weeks later, the invitations went out. Not to me. To my sister. To Daniel's college roommate. To half the people from Ashley's office. People I'd never met. People who'd never once sat at my kitchen table. The housewarming, Ashley's cousin mentioned to me almost in passing at a birthday party, was going to be kind of a big deal. Caterers. A string quartet, if you can imagine that, for a housewarming. I smiled and said that sounded lovely, and I meant it, mostly, because some small, foolish part of me assumed the invitation to me personally had simply gotten lost in the shuffle. Mothers do that. We give people the benefit of the doubt long after the doubt has stopped being reasonable. So I called Daniel myself. I asked, gently, what time I should come. There was a pause on the line I didn't like, a pause with edges to it. "Mom," he said, it's an adult thing. Ashley's coworkers, some of her design clients, I think it'd be better if you sat this one out." An adult thing? As if I were a child who might embarrass him? As if I hadn't spent 38 years standing in exactly the kind of houses his wife's design clients were now going to be admiring, running my hands along baseboards, telling nervous buyers where the good light came in the afternoon. I know more about houses, about how they're built and what they're worth, than every person on that guest list combined. But that wasn't the part that stayed with me. What stayed with me was the word sit. Sit this one out, as though I were furniture to be moved to a different room. I told him it was fine. I told him to have a wonderful time. And then I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen with a casserole dish going cold, and I let myself remember, because once you pull one thread, the whole sweater comes apart in your hands. The Christmas of 2017 came back to me first. Ashley had rearranged my dining room without asking, moved my mother's china cabinet against a different wall so the flow made more sense. And when I mentioned, lightly, that I'd prefer things stay where they were, she'd laughed and said, "Grace, it's not a museum." Daniel hadn't said a word in my defense. He just refilled his wine. The summer of 2019 came next. I'd offered to keep my granddaughter, Mia, for a week while they went to the coast, and Ashley had told me, in front of Daniel, that she just felt more comfortable with someone a little more current on things. Current, as though I'd forgotten how to raise a child, as though I hadn't raised the very man standing beside her saying nothing. And then the loan itself. 18 months ago, at a birthday dinner, Ashley had made a joke, she called it later, about how she couldn't wait until the house was actually theirs, deed and everything. Daniel had laughed along. I remember thinking at the time that I was being oversensitive. I remember choosing deliberately to let it go. That's not one bad day. That's a pattern. And a pattern, once you finally let yourself see it, doesn't ask your permission to keep unspooling. I want to tell you something my husband Robert used to say, back when he was still alive and I still had someone across the table to say things to. He used to say, "Grace, you can forgive people and still remember exactly what they did." I didn't understand that sentence for years. I understand it completely now. 3 days after the phone call, I drove to the grocery store, on the same aisle I've been walking for 20 years, and that's where the pattern finally became something I couldn't unsee. I was reaching for a can of tomatoes when I heard Ashley's voice 2 aisles over, on the phone, not troubling herself to lower it. She was talking to someone, her sister I found out later, about the party, about logistics, about the caterer's final head count. And then she said the sentence that changed the shape of everything. "Honestly, it's easier without Grace here. Daniel agrees. Once the refinance goes through next month, it's not even really her house anymore anyway. So, I don't know, it felt like the right time to start drawing some lines." The refinance. I stood very still, a can of tomatoes in my hand, and I felt something in my chest go quiet and cold, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm hits. That stillness that isn't peace, it's pressure. Because I knew exactly what she meant. I'd structured that loan myself. I knew precisely what a refinance could do to a co-ownership deed if it was filed the right way, quietly, before anyone with my name on the paperwork thought to ask questions. And that wasn't even the worst thing the two of them were hiding that night. I just didn't know that yet. I put the tomatoes back on the shelf. I don't even remember walking to my car. What I remember is sitting in the driver's seat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. I checked the clock, because counting things has always been how I keep myself steady, and understanding with a calm that surprised even me that I was no longer hurt. I was informed, and those are 2 very different things to be. If you've ever felt that particular kind of cold stillness, the moment grief turns into clarity, the moment you stop asking why and start asking what now, you know exactly what I mean. Stay with me. This is where it turns. Because here is what almost nobody in that family remembered. In all their talk of adult things and drawing lines, and it's not even really her house anymore, they forgot who actually reads paperwork in this family. They forgot who spent 38 years making a living off exactly this kind of forgetting. When I got home that night, I didn't cry, and I didn't call Daniel to confront him. I made a cup of tea, and I went to the hallway closet, and I took down the gray accordion folder I keep on the top shelf, the one Robert used to tease me about because I labeled every tab in block letters, even though I was the only one who ever opened it. Daniel, house. Right where I'd left it. Inside was everything. The original HELOC agreement against my own home. The deed with both our names on it, filed and recorded, county stamp and all. And clipped to the top, a single handwritten note in Robert's handwriting from before he passed. Because my husband, in his last steady year, had sat with me at this same table and helped me draft the language himself, back when Daniel was still in college, and none of us imagined it would ever matter. Robert had written across the top of his own copy, in the neat block print he used for everything, "Protect the boy from himself if you have to. Love isn't the same as blind." I sat at that table for a long time with his handwriting in front of me. I could hear him saying it, the way you can still hear someone's voice years after they're gone if you loved them enough while they had one. He was right about our son back then, in a way I hadn't wanted to admit. And he was right now, from wherever he is, in a way that felt less like a haunting and more like a hand on my shoulder. The next morning, I called Marian. Marian Castellano has been my attorney for 11 years, ever since she helped me close out Robert's estate. And if you've never had a lawyer who picks up on the second ring and says your name like she's been waiting for the call, I recommend finding one. "Grace," she said, "what did they do?" I told her everything. The house, the note, the refinance whisper in the grocery aisle, the housewarming I wasn't invited to. She was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone doing arithmetic in their head. "They can't refinance you out without your signature," she said. "Not legally, not without committing fraud, which, knowing you, Grace, I assume you already suspected that's exactly the shortcut someone's considering." A pause. "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect what's mine," I said, calmly. "And I want it done before they think to ask me for anything." Marian laughed, short and dry, the laugh of a woman who has spent decades watching people underestimate other people. "I've been waiting for this call since the day you told me you put your name on that deed," she said. "Let's get to work." 2 weeks later. I want you to understand something about what I did next, because it would be easy to hear this part of the story and think it came from anger. It didn't. Anger is loud. What I felt, sitting in Marian's office signing paperwork with a fountain pen Robert gave me 30 years ago, was something closer to relief. The relief of finally putting a name to a shape I'd been feeling in the dark for a long time. We didn't do anything reckless. We didn't do anything cruel. We did exactly what any co-owner with equal standing has every legal right to do. I formally recorded a notice with the county preventing any refinance or title transfer without my written consent. Something I could have done at any point in the last 2 years and simply hadn't, because I trusted my son. I called the loan servicer and confirmed, in writing, that the HELOC remained solely in my name and solely my liability, meaning I had every right to call it due if the terms of our private agreement, the ones Daniel had signed, the ones he'd apparently forgotten existed, were violated. And they had been violated, repeatedly. He'd missed 2 of the informal repayment transfers we'd agreed on, quietly, without ever mentioning it to me, assuming I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't say anything if I did. I noticed. I always notice. 38 years of closings will do that to a person. Marian drafted a letter, certified. It would arrive at the house, my house, on paper, whatever anyone at that party wanted to believe, 3 days before the housewarming. I didn't do it to ruin the party. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this can sound if you don't understand the kind of woman I am. I did it because a woman who spends her whole life being quiet learns eventually that quiet and invisible are not the same thing. I could be calm and still be seen. I could love my son and still refuse to disappear from my own investment because his wife found me inconvenient at a party. That certified letter landed on a Thursday. By Friday, my phone had become something I almost didn't recognize. Daniel at 4:12. Missed call. Daniel at 4:15. Missed call. Daniel at 4:20. A text. "Mom, what is this letter?" Ashley at 4:31. A text I hadn't asked for. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is completely inappropriate." Daniel at 5:03. Missed call. Daniel at 5:04. Voicemail. "Mom, call me back. This has to be some kind of mistake. This has to be a misunderstanding. Just call me." Ashley at 5:40. Another text. "You're really going to do this 2 days before the party, after everything we've given you access to?" Daniel at 6:15. Missed call. Daniel at 6:16. Voicemail. His voice tighter now. "Mom, Ashley's freaking out. The caterer needs a final number, and now she thinks the bank's going to. Just call me back, please." Daniel at 7:50. Missed call. Daniel at 9 o'clock. Missed call. Daniel at 11:30. A text. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." I let every single one of those calls ring through to voicemail, and I want to tell you, it took everything I had. My hands wanted to reach for that phone. My whole life I have been the one who answers, who smooths things over, who makes sure nobody has to sit alone in their own panic for very long. But I had spent 38 years watching families fall apart because someone rushed the conversation before they were steady enough to have it.
So I let the phone buzz itself quiet on the counter, and I finished my tea, and I went to bed. I slept fine that night.
That surprised me more than anything else in this whole story. Saturday morning, Daniel showed up at my door without calling first. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, which I understood, because I recognized the particular hollowness under his eyes. I used to see it in his father during the worst month of his illness. Some small, ungenerous part of me wanted to feel satisfied by that. I didn't. Mostly I just felt tired and sad, in the specific way you're sad when you finally see clearly something you spent 2 years refusing to look at directly. "Mom, what did you do?" he said, standing on my porch, not even inside yet. "I protected an investment," I said. "The same as I'd have done for any client 20 years ago. You just happened to be the client this time." "It's not a client, it's your family, it's my house." "It's our house," I said. "It's been our house since the day I signed a loan against the home your father and I built so that you could have one of your own. I didn't forget that. I'm asking why you did." He didn't have an answer for that. He had a lot of other things. That Ashley was humiliated, that the caterer was asking questions, that people were going to talk, that I'd embarrassed him in front of people whose opinions mattered to his career. Not one sentence in there was actually an apology. It was a list of consequences he wanted undone, dressed up to sound like remorse. I let him finish, and then I asked him one question, the kind of question I learned works better than any accusation ever could. "How much rent have you paid me for living in a house I financed?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "How many of the payments we agreed on, the informal ones, the ones you asked for because a formal loan felt too transactional between family, how many of those have you actually made in the last 8 months?" Still nothing, because he knew. He'd known the whole time, the way people always know exactly what they've stopped doing, even while they're busy being outraged that someone finally noticed. "You didn't want me at the party," I said, and my voice didn't rise, not once, the whole conversation. Fine. I can survive not being invited to a party. What I can't survive, what I won't survive, Daniel, not again, is being erased from something I built with my own 2 hands so that it's easier for your wife to tell her design clients a story about a house that came from nowhere. "That's not what this is," he said, but it was quiet now, the fight going out of him the way it does when a person finally hears themselves from the outside. "Apologies that come in the wrong order aren't apologies," I told him. "They're negotiations." "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry it stopped working." He stood on my porch a long time after that, not saying anything, and for a moment I saw the boy I raised instead of the man standing in front of me. The boy who used to sit at that same kitchen table doing math homework, chewing his pencil, looking to me like I had all the answers in the world. I still love that boy. I will always love that boy. But loving him has never once meant having him my whole life to hold, unsupervised, on the assumption he'd never drop it. That wasn't the worst part of the day either, though. The worst part came an hour later. It came in the shape of a small voice on my porch steps. Mia had walked the 4 blocks from Daniel's house by herself. She's 11 now, old enough to feel brave doing that, and not quite old enough to understand why her mother would be furious about it. And she sat down next to me on the steps with the particular gravity children get when they've been listening at doors they weren't supposed to be listening at. "Grandma," she said, "is it true you own our house?" "Part of it," I said. "Your dad and I own it together." She thought about that for a while, picking at a loose thread on her shoelace.
"Mom said you're trying to take it away." "I'm not taking anything away, sweetheart. I'm making sure nobody takes it away from me without asking first." She nodded slowly, the way children do when they're filing something away to think about later, on their own terms. And then she said the thing that undid me more than anything Daniel or Ashley had said all week. "I didn't want the party without you anyway. I told Mom that." She said I was being dramatic. I put my arm around her, and we sat on my porch steps for a long time, not saying much else. And I thought about how children always understand loyalty better than the adults who are supposed to be teaching it to them. That night, alone at my kitchen table, I did something I don't do often. I took out the box where I keep Robert's letters, not the note about the house, the other ones, the ones from early in our marriage when he traveled for work and wrote to me instead of calling, because he said a letter meant you had to mean every word of it before you sent it. I read the one he wrote the week Daniel was born. He'd written, "Whatever this boy becomes, Grace, promise me we raise him to know the difference between being loved and being handed everything. I don't want a son who mistakes generosity for weakness."
I sat with that letter a long time. I think somewhere in the last 2 years, without meaning to, I'd let that promise slip. Not out of foolishness, out of love, the ordinary, exhausted love of a mother who just wants her son to be happy and assumes happiness and character will simply arrive together without tending. They don't. I know that now. Monday came, and with it, the meeting Marian had arranged. Daniel, myself, and a mediator, because Marian said rightly that some conversations go better with a referee in the room. The housewarming, as it turned out, had happened without me, and without much of the fanfare Ashley had planned, since half of Saturday had apparently been consumed by phone calls to a real estate attorney trying to figure out whether Grace's letter had any legal teeth. It had teeth. Marian doesn't draft things without teeth. At the mediator's table, Daniel was different than he'd been on my porch, calmer, more prepared, which told me Marian's letter had done exactly what a well-placed piece of paperwork is supposed to do. It had made the conversation possible by making the alternative expensive. We didn't resolve everything that day. Some things don't resolve in a single sitting, no matter how good the mediator is. But we agreed on terms. Daniel would resume the payments, formalized this time, in writing, with actual consequences attached if he stopped again.
My name would remain on the deed until the loan was satisfied in full. No quiet refinance, no erasing, nothing done again without my signature on it. And separately, apart from any of the legal language, I told him one more thing. Because Marian had taught me that the legal protection and the human conversation are two different documents, and you shouldn't try to make one do the work of the other. I told him that I loved him too much to let him become a man who thought disrespecting his mother was a small enough thing to get away with. I told him love isn't the same as blind, which is a sentence I didn't tell him came from his father, because some inheritances are better felt than explained. He cried, a little, at the mediator's table. Not the performance kind of crying. The real kind. The kind that comes out sideways when a person finally understands what they almost lost. Ashley didn't come to that meeting. I heard, through Mia mostly, and a little through my sister, that things between her and Daniel got tense for a while after. The kind of tense that happens when one person in a marriage discovers the other person has been quietly building a version of the future that didn't include being honest. I don't take pleasure in that. I want to be honest about that too.
I didn't do any of this to punish Ashley, or even really to punish Daniel. I did it because a woman who spends her whole life being generous eventually has to decide whether generosity and self-respect can live in the same house together. I decided they could. I just had to be the one to draw the line, because nobody else in that family was going to draw it for me. A month later, Daniel asked if he could bring Mia over for a Sunday dinner, just the two of them. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He showed up with a card, of all things, a folded piece of paper, not store-bought, something he'd clearly written himself, and then sat on for a while before he found the nerve to hand it to me. I didn't read it in front of him. I've learned over the years that some things are better read alone, later, when you don't have to manage your own face for someone else's benefit. I read it that night at the kitchen table. It said, among other things, that he was sorry, actually sorry this time, the kind of sorry that names the thing instead of naming the inconvenience. He wrote that he understood now what the house had actually cost me, not just in dollars, and that he understood, too, what it must have felt like to be told to sin out a party in a house I'd helped build with my own signature. I didn't tape that letter to the refrigerator the way I once might have, eager for any small gesture of reconciliation. I put it in the drawer, the same drawer where I keep Robert's letters, because some apologies deserve to be kept close, privately, without needing to be displayed for anyone else's approval. It goes in a drawer, not the trash. That's the difference between forgiving someone and forgetting what they did. The house is still Daniel and Ashley's home. My name is still on the deed, and it will stay there until the day the loan is paid in full, and not one day sooner, no matter how many parties come and go without me. Ashley and I are civil now. Not close, not yet, maybe not ever, but civil, which is its own kind of peace when you've raised the kind of family where everyone eventually has to learn to sit at the same table again. Mia comes over most Sundays now, on her own, riding her bike the 4 blocks when the weather allows it.
Last week, she asked me to teach her how deeds work, how ownership works, how you read the fine print on something before you sign your name to it. I told her I'd teach her everything I know. I told her that's the best inheritance I have to give. Not a house, not money, but the ability to read the whole page before you decide what it's worth. There's a version of this story where I storm into that housewarming uninvited and make a scene in front of the caterer and the string quartet and everyone Ashley wanted to impress. I thought about it in the angriest hour of that whole ordeal, if I'm honest with you. But that was never who I wanted to be, and it was never who Robert married, and it certainly isn't the woman I want my granddaughter to grow up watching. I didn't need to be at that party to prove I mattered. My name on that deed already said everything that needed saying. Some women raise their voices to be heard. I found, at 68 years old, that a woman who's certain of what's hers rarely has to raise anything at all. That's not cruelty. That's honesty with a handle on it. I still have the casserole dish, by the way. I made a new one a few weeks after all of this settled, and I brought it over myself, unannounced, on a Tuesday evening when I knew Daniel would be home. He opened the door, saw the dish, saw my face, and didn't say a word, just stepped back and let me in. The way you let someone back into a house they never actually left, no matter how hard someone else tried to convince them otherwise. I set it on the counter. Same kitchen. A house with my name still on the paper, right where it belongs, right where it was always meant to stay. And that night, driving home under a sky just beginning to go dark at the edges, I thought about my husband's handwriting, and my granddaughter's small hand in mine on the porch steps, and a certified letter that did more talking than I ever needed to raise my own voice to do. I didn't win by being louder than anyone in that family. I won by being the only one in the room who'd read every page. And she slept the way a woman sleeps when she finally stops asking permission to matter in her own life.